This is a quick explanation of this mod and how it comes together, but it's also kind of to serve as a template both for myself if I want to do this again in the future, and also for anybody else that might be interested in changing or making their own sounds for their desired tanks. What the purpose of this mod is not necessarily to make it sound better, but also to add a lot of variation in the sounds, because I've noticed if you hear the same sound over and over, it kind of sucks. But if it's almost the same sound but with a slight variation, it sounds like it, you will not notice it, but it does make it a big difference. It just doesn't sound as monotone. So the whole idea behind this is just to add small variations in sounds, just to give it a little bit more realism, and yeah, just make the sounds a little bit more enjoyable. Another thing I need to mention with the overall sound design of this game is that if you have multiple sounds with the same name, I'll show the numbering on screen of how to make sure that the game plays the same sound, but the different variations of it. You'll see that it is a number coded thing, so it has the same name with the 01, 02, 03. That way the game knows that the sound needs to be played for that specific action, but it can then cycle through the numbers. However, that being said, you will see that the game tends to play the first sound by far the most, much more than the other sounds. And then a second thing is, it almost like the game goes through certain ticks and then checks which sound should be played for that action. What this means is that if you have, let's say, X sound for the machine gun, and you keep on firing it, it's going to keep on playing that one sound over and over and over. Only if you fire and then give it like 2 ticks, whatever that might be, but in this case is a second or two, then it will trigger the second or a different sound. Otherwise you'll be hearing the same sound over and over again and being like, but there's no variation. But there is a variation. Like I said, it's just, it needs some time to basically go to the next tick, and then you'll hear the different sounds. I hope that makes sense. So just as a general overview, first thing that is obviously most important is the formatting of audio clips, as the game only accepts a very specific format. You can see that in the modding manual, and I'm going to show it up on the screen right now. It has to be in this format, otherwise the game does not register the sound, or it will lead to a crash. Obviously, this engine has been in development for a very long time, and it comes from a long time ago. So I'm assuming a large factor of why it's set up the way that it does or is because it's mostly to minimize the space usage, as recording in these recording any sound in mono will ensure that it is much smaller in space. Then the way that the game also plays the sounds is, from what I've picked up, is basically it plays it at the spot that it's created. So if it's a gunshot, for example, what I did with the main shot is I added the shell falling. However, the gunshot, that sound is played at the tip of the barrel, and then so is the shell falling. However, if the tank is in motion, you'll hear that you can hear the shot fire from the tip of the cannon. However, once the shell starts falling, if you're driving forward, it sounds like it's actually happening inside the cabin, which is pretty cool. So it works out pretty well. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that the later games separate, well, I say later games, but there's only one other tank sim in the series. But anyways, the later game has a way of muffling sounds when you're inside the tank versus when you're outside the tank, when you're buttoned or unbuttoned. This game, on the other hand, does not have anything. Not that I could find. I tried, but I could not find a place. There are some sounds that only play when you're inside the tank. However, you'll hear most sounds at the equivalent volume, whether you are inside the tank or outside the tank. So that also makes it a little bit more difficult for customization, as everything sounds the same. So you can't use interior shots and exterior shots to make it sound really good. Unfortunately, you can only use one type of shot. And yeah, so the first one is just the gear change. I just gave it a couple of different sounds. There's nothing spectacular about this one. As for the reload sound, it's pretty straightforward. I just try to basically sync up every time the shell would be moved around or touch something or clang-a-lang, just to match that up with, well, the sound that sounds right. So the variations might not sound as good. I feel like some of them do sound better than others, but like I said, whilst you're playing, it just gives you a nice bit of variation. Then for the main gun, all I did was just took 3 different sounds, modified them a little bit, including the echo into the distance, and then what I added to the main shots instead of the reload was the shells falling, because I feel like that is actually part of the shot and not part of the reload. The problem with that is, as I mentioned before, that if you fire and you're standing still, it sounds like the shell is falling from the tip of the barrel, because the shot sound is played at the tip of the barrel. So that's not ideal. The other option is adding that to the reload sound, but then it's going to play too late, I think. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. But other than that, the shot is pretty straightforward. Like I said, you can just add a little bit of variation into that thing. Basically, what it does with the engine sound is that it uses one very short clip, and it uses that clip for everything, both low RPM, high RPM, and the way the game achieves this is by having the sound set at a base frequency and then using it, like multiplying it, so changing the frequency of the sound, making it sound like it's going faster with a higher pitch and vice versa. So this can get a little bit complicated depending on how you want your engine to sound. So for example, you can use a idling engine sound and then up the frequency, because you'll see where it says step K frequency, that is at its maximum RPM. So let's say if you've got an engine that's idling, you want the top RPM to sound basically like it's 2 or 3 times that fast, and then you'll take whatever the base frequency is, times it by this number, and that'll get you to whatever the final sound is. So this can be interesting depending on how you want to set it up. You can either use you can use any engine sound, and depending on what that bass sound is, if it's an idling sound, is it a driving sound, you've just got to play around with these frequencies then to get it to the desired output that you want. This can take quite some time to figure out properly, as it doesn't always work out as well. For me personally, like I said, I think it's cool how the game uses sound, but unfortunately that also makes it quite difficult to design really good, or redesign the sounds to fit in very, very well. So like for example, in another game you'll have, sorry, I'm going to use War Thunder as an example. You have the idling sound, you have the engine at 33%, 66%, 99%, but then you also have another variation of those sounds where the engine's under load at 33%, 66%, and 99%. So it gives you a lot of variation in terms of what you can do with the sound. So it sounds very different all the time, where with this game, because you only have one sound, you have to very carefully craft it to sound the way that you want it to sound. So not as customizable. Like I said, I understand in terms of efficiency, but yeah, not as customizable. As I mentioned before, it uses a certain base frequency, and then at maximum RPM, whatever the multiplication is of that frequency in the game file, that'll be the end sound for the maximum RPM. And this way, like I said, you can use different sounds. So you can either use an idling sound and get it up, make it sound like it's running faster, or you can use an engine sound that's already being driven at a certain speed, and then the game will reduce the frequency, which will make it sound like it's idle when the tank is not moving and the RPM is low. So in this case, I used just some YouTube video of a Matilda driving up a hill, and I just used a very small bit. With the RTSs in this series, you can have an engine sound that is very long, and it actually makes it much better. It uses the same principle of the frequency adjustment. However, because there's a lot of moving parts and you're not always focused on the same thing, it's nice if you have a long sound that it runs through, because then the variations seem a lot more. As with the tanks, so for example this game, and then Steel Armor, Sabu, you'll see that the shorter clip that you use is going to work much better. I see most of the big mods anyways use a sound clip of about like 3 seconds or so. So you actually want the least amount of variance in that little sound clip for the tank sims. And because of the way that the frequencies then work, it's going to sound better. You can still use a longer clip, but I've found that it starts sounding weird and not as good. And you also get a little bit annoyed, like let's say I tested it out with having a little bit of a rev in there, but if it comes past every 2 minutes or so, it starts getting quite annoying, where just the regular sound with no variations is actually best option for the engine. Then finally we come to the machine gun, which is by far the most difficult. And effectively what you need to do here is that you need to understand that, once again, because there's not a lot of variation in this game or customization, and it's the same sound used for everything. Most other games you'll see has a different sound for when you have a single shot of a gun or when you have a loop firing of a gun. And with this game, unfortunately, it is only one sound for everything. So you have to, it's just when you're opening fire with multiple shots, all it does is basically play the sound over and over and over. So this took quite a bit of crafting to get it to sound okay, and I'm still not exactly happy with how it ended up. But effectively, if you look here, you'll see that I took the main shot and I phased it in and out, and then this is just I think a little bit of bass, if I remember correctly, just to add a little bit of punch to the shot. And then you'll see there's a very distinct point where I cut it off. So if it's on repeat fire, you'll hear this part of the shot over and over and over and over, where if it's a single shot, it'll play the entire sound all the way through. So this is just the almost, I'm not sure what you call it, but like the echo into the distance, and then this is the machine gun shells falling from the gun. So if you're an automatic fire, you'll just hear the repeat of this sound over and over and over, and then on the last shot you'll hear the rest play out. So like I said, this one was a little bit, this is quite difficult in this game to get it to sound right, as you have to make one sound good both in single shot and on a loop, which is quite difficult for me personally. I'm not a sound engineer or anything, but anyways, and on that note, that actually is a lot easier on the RTS games, because you don't have to accommodate both. Because you are driving this tank, you can single fire or multi-fire or do what needs to be done, where with the RTS, the AI most of the time automatically shoots in a specific burst. So let's say it's shooting X gun and there's a 3 or 4 bullet burst, you can just make the sound file every time that it plays for the sound of 4 bullets firing. So you can get a better result on the strategy games on the Gravity Team RTS games than you can on the tank sims because of that reason. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope this was informative and helpful. So goodbye.